Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Today's webinar focuses on ERIC's online submission system for grantees and contractors. We want to make sure you are familiar with IES's requirements for funded research and the steps required to access and use ERIC's online system for submitting your peer-reviewed manuscript to ERIC. It's easy to submit your work to ERIC, and we'll tell you a few things about the process that will make it even easier. We announced an exciting shift to our policy earlier this week, and we wanted to share the latest information with you. But before we begin, I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items. First, we're going to mute everyone so we don't get feedback from your phones. If you have a question at any time, please enter it in the chat box, and we'll answer during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. We'll be posting the presentation on YouTube in a few weeks, and we'll make it accessible from the ERIC website. We'll then send everyone who registered for this webinar an email to let you know when the video is available, and you can share that link with others. Today, two of us will be speaking with you. I'm Erin Pollard, the project officer for ERIC, which is a program in the Institute of Education Sciences, the research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. I oversee the program from the government's perspective and set policies for the program. Judy Beck is a deputy project manager for the ERIC contract. She co-leads the ERIC processing team and works closely with grantee submissions. She will walk you through the system and give you tips for submitting your manuscript and make sure it's a seamless process. So here's what we're going to cover in today's webinar. A brief overview of ERIC, grantee requirements for funded manuscripts, including the changes I mentioned earlier, a demonstration of the ERIC grantee and online submission system, a recap of key tips that we went over in the walkthrough, what happens after you submit your work to ERIC, and then we're going to wrap up and take your questions. So to begin, what is ERIC? ERIC is a free library of education research used by 12 million users around the world. We comprehensively index about 1,200 journals and 700 grade literature sources. You can find us at eric.ed.gov. So why should you care about ERIC? ERIC has an extensive curated collection of research that has been indexed since 1966 to provide free access to literature to educators and researchers. There's currently 1.8 million records of journal articles, reports, conference papers, white papers, and grantee reports available. Most of these materials are peer-reviewed, especially the more recent materials. There are about 400,000 full-text articles available in ERIC. IES, and then later the U.S. Department of Education, implemented a public access policy as a way to ensure that peer-reviewed scholarly publications supported through federal research and training program grants and contracts are made available for public use. This infographic walks through who is subject to the policy. If you are awarded an IES grant or contract after September 2011, you are required to make sure that your work is available in ERIC. So how do you do this? The first thing that you need to do is to make sure that your grant or contract number is included in the acknowledgement section of your manuscript. This is required to get it flagged as a public access article. The second thing you need to do is to tell your publisher that you are a grantee or a contractor and are subject to the IES public access policy and are required to have the full text of your article freely available in ERIC 12 months after publication. Third, you should visit the ERIC website to see if the journal you published your manuscript with has agreed to deposit the manuscript on your behalf. Because journals may switch publishers, it is necessary to check this list after your work is published to ensure that the journal and publisher matches the list we have on our website. If they do, and if your work was published after January 1st of 2020, then you are done. You've complied with this policy. If your work is published in a journal that is not on this list, or if your work was published before 2020, then you need to submit your work through the online submission system. A key aspect of this policy is that in order to comply, you must notify your publisher about your grant or contract requirements prior to signing an agreement about copyright. This will assure you retain the right to have the full text of your manuscript display in ERIC. It is your responsibility to make sure that your publisher will allow you to submit your work to ERIC and for the article to be publicly available after 12 months. If your work was funded before September 2011, then submitting your research to ERIC is optional. The public access policy does not apply to book chapters or non-peer-reviewed conference proceedings, but we welcome and encourage you to submit these to ERIC as well. Another part of this policy is having the data from your research studies be made publicly available. We recently released a new field that will allow grantees to link their data to their publications. Judy will show you more about this field later this afternoon. So, what does this policy require and when? If IES publishes your work, or if your work is published in a participating journal, then the ERIC team will handle everything behind the scenes, and you will not need to submit anything through the online submission system. If you are publishing your work in a journal that will not submit the full text for you, then you are required to submit your final peer-reviewed manuscript as soon as it is accepted for publication in that journal. If you are publishing in a non-journal source and your work is not published by IES, then you are required to submit your work as soon as it is published. Once your work has been submitted to ERIC, the ERIC team will create a record with all of the publication information. Records are typically available at the eric.ed.gov website within 12 weeks. One second. Okay. Well, the full text will be added to ERIC a few weeks after submission. The record will be added to ERIC a few weeks after submission. The full text of your manuscript will not be released until 1 year after publication. If ERIC indexes the journal that published your manuscript, there will be 2 records of your article in ERIC, one for the journal article and one for your grantee submission, unless you are published in one of the participating journals, and that is after January 2020. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Judy Beck.
All right. Well, thanks for letting me know you couldn't hear me. As Erin was indicating, grantee submissions are a special part of ERIC with over 1,400 in the digital library already. But we know there are more to be included, and certainly future grants will produce significant research disseminated through journal articles, conference papers, and reports. Today, we're going to really dig into the specifics of how you can get your research into ERIC to comply with the public access mandate. In a minute, we'll start talking about using the online submission system, and along the way, I will give you some things to watch for so you can have a successful experience the first time around. As you prepare to submit your work, here's one thing I suggest as a preliminary step. See if your grantee submission is already in ERIC. We do receive duplicate entries. People forget that they submitted a final peer-reviewed manuscript maybe a year ago, or a co-author may have already made the submission. So search ERIC for the title of the grantee work or your name as an author name to check. If it is already there, then you're done. However, if you see the journal version listed and not the grantee submission version, you do need to submit, unless, as Erin has explained, your work has been published since January 2020 in one of the participating journals. So be sure to check that list of journals and make sure if you have to submit or not. So we're going to walk through the submission process, which is basically 5 steps from beginning to end. We'll start with the first step, which is linking to the system. Then we're going to review background information and instructions on how to successfully upload your content, move to answering questions about your content, and then really get into the meat of it with step 4, where we'll talk about the specifics of entering the last step, we'll finally talk about actually submitting your work to ERIC. All right, so we hope most of you are already familiar with the ERIC website, but in case there's a newcomer, here's the URL. Erin had mentioned it, and a screenshot of the ERIC homepage. So let's anticipate step 1, linking to the online submission system. It's actually pretty simple to begin. You can see the word submit at the bottom of the web page, and that link appears on all site pages. So you can access the system from anywhere on the website. So now let's hold our breath and go live and connect to the online submission system. All right. So you may want to note as we begin that you do need to submit one document at a time. The form was not created for batch uploads. You don't have to log in. You don't have to have a password or anything like that. But you do have to do one thing at a time because each document that you submit is creating a unique record for each individual item. So clicking Submit in the website footer will bring you to the online submission information page, and we'll move on to step 2. Now, I know you're going to be tempted to skip over this page, but please don't. Eric's provided a number of useful infographics, videos, and links to FAQs on this page, some of which do apply specifically to grantees. The first 2 sections, guidelines and allowable content, are geared more toward those who are making regular online submissions. But the last 2, PDF requirements and additional information for IES grantees, contain information that will just make things go a lot smoother for you. These resources give you a good grounding and help you understand what you need to have available before you actually begin creating your records for submission. We outline here what information your PDF needs to include and how to make it compliant. There's also a link to the IES public access policy in case you need a refresher, and a link to helpful FAQs. There we go. One thing to note under the PDF requirements section, grantees do not need to offer proof of peer review. This is something online submitters need to do. Now, here's another thing I'd like you to keep in mind. Some of you may ask a TA or a departmental assistant to make the submissions for you. Please encourage them to use these resources so they know what we expect to receive. So once you've reviewed the information on this page, you can hit this green button, Begin, down at the bottom, and we'll go to step 3. All right, this page acts as a pre-check and a screen for those who are making regular online submissions, so they don't spend time uploading material that we don't accept for ERIC. However, you must also answer the questions in order to move forward with the process. The questions ask you about your research. Is it related to education? Your authority to submit the material to ERIC. Do you grant ERIC the right to show the full text? And is your submitted material in English? A no response to any one of these questions will generate a notification and actually does end the process. So it's important to go ahead and click yes for each one of these questions and able to go forward. In case you miss a button, let's answer no to one of them, and when you hit continue, you'll see that you get a notice that the document isn't eligible and you can't go any further. But there is a start a new submission link right here, so you can begin the process anew. Go ahead and do all of your yeses. There we go. You don't have to log back in, just start all over again. So once you've said yes to everything, you can hit continue. Now we're really in the heart of it. Here with step 4, one of the things that's really key is information that you put into this form also needs to appear on the document you're uploading, with a few exceptions that we'll make note of. So the very first thing that you need to do is enter the title exactly as it is in your document. And I'm just going to shorthand a lot of this to get through. So we'll just say title. But do make sure it matches what's on your PDF to be uploaded. Then you want to add the author names, and on the form, it's in first name, middle name, optional, last name order. And there's space or the ability to add up to 6 author names through this form. So enter up to 6. If you have more names on the document, don't worry about it. The ERIC processing team does have the ability in our system to continue entering the rest of the names, so everyone will be accounted for. And you can also enter any author IDs, such as an ORCID ID, that any of the authors may have. So be sure to include that information as well. All right, next is the abstract. And I'm going to violate all of what I'm going to say about an abstract by simply typing abstract. You can copy and paste or type in to the abstract box the abstract that you want shown on your record. Now, some people have left this field blank, I guess assuming that if the abstract is on the full text PDF, that we can just go ahead and copy it in. But we need you to fill in this field. So copy and paste from your own document, or if you have not written an abstract yet, you must create one for the grantee submission record. Just a word about abstracts. There's kind of 3 C's for abstracts. Should be concise, clear, and adequately convey what your document is about. Because remember, this is the first representation of the full text of your work. You want to think of ERIC users who are going to be searching for the information. We're going to be trying to find your record. And when the search function looks at the title and the abstract, you want to be able to have the main concepts right there and show up. And that's why this is also very important for the indexing process. As we process the records, we will apply terms from the ERIC thesaurus to each of records. So use specific words from your paper. You can use your own language. This helps tell the indexers what you consider to be the most important concepts, the most important terminology that you're using, and then they can apply the most appropriate descriptors to your record. So guidance on writing an abstract for ERIC is available by clicking the link here above the abstract box. The link also is in that first page of resources. All right, you can move on from the abstract. So after you've done that, you need to indicate if the document you're submitting is work funded in whole or in part by IES. If it's work funded by another Department of Education entity or some other non-education department or agency. This is where you can ensure that you're meeting the IES requirement of making your funded research available to the public. So submitters who click any one of these first 3 buttons will have their record and their content designated as a grantee submission. If you have work that was funded solely by a foundation, a state agency, or some other non-federal source, it's not considered to be a grantee submission for IES or ERIC purposes. So anyone with that kind of work at this point needs to click no for the question. You can still go on, but you won't be a grantee submission. So the last thing on this page is a drop-down menu to indicate what format the content is that you're submitting. Is it a journal article? Is it a conference paper, a report, etc.? So selecting yes for funding, and then selecting, say, conference paper or journal article as the type of document you're submitting, that will cause additional boxes to appear on the next page of the form for collection of that specific information. So let's use journal article. There we go. As our example. Most of the grantee submissions that we get are for journal articles. So the same steps would apply if you were submitting a conference paper or a report. So as Erin has said, just a side note, contractor reports not published by IES, such as maybe for one of the regional educational laboratory contractors, they'll be processed under the provider name, not as a grantee submission. So let's hit continue. Oh, I guess it helps if I fill in the form, huh? Fortunately, I've done this enough times that it'll pre-populate things and we'll go, yes, we are IES funded. So see, it's nice. There's validation. You have to fill in the boxes to go forward. All right, now we're on the next page. The first thing that we're looking for are publication details, and publication date comes first. So this isn't the date you're submitting to ERIC, but the date that it was either accepted as peer-reviewed manuscript or that it'll be published as a journal article. If it's a conference paper, the date should be when it was accepted or presented. This same date must appear on the PDF that you're going to upload. Most of the incomplete submissions we receive is because there's no date on the PDF. Now, sometimes an article is in press at the time that you do the grantee submission to ERIC. So you should use the date the manuscript was accepted for publication. At the very least, put the year that it's going to be accepted. All right, after that, so we're going to put 2020 on there. There we go. You will also be asked to provide a page count. We'll just put in 12 pages for the heck of it. This is a good place to make sure that you don't have any blank pages at the end of your PDF that get counted in that page count. So we want you to remove those from the PDF. All right, the next thing is a box for references. You can enter 0 into this box. ERIC made a change, and we're no longer showing that information in the record, but the system still requires some kind of entry in that field. This was a holdover from when ERIC used microfiche, and we don't really need this, so you can use 0 for this box. All right, since we've selected journal article as the document type, the form asks here for journal citation information, the name of the journal, volume, issue, pages, and again, a date. This information, journal citation, needs to also appear on the document itself. If you selected the format of a conference paper, that form will ask you to supply the meeting information with dates. Again, if you have an in-press article, you want to put as much information as you have available. Absolutely, the name of the journal that you've submitted your article to and that it was accepted by. If you don't have volume, issue numbers yet, page range yet, that's fine, but at least put the date that it was accepted in to the date box right here. And put that information on the PDF. All right. Now it's time. Well, actually, let me say one other thing. Since we've mentioned several times, write something in the form, put it on the PDF. Why do we ask you to put information that you've typed into the submission form onto the PDF of your article or paper? There are two reasons. One, it's a best practice way for us to verify the information by comparing the form, the record, to the PDF. But also, again, think about ERIC users. If another researcher downloads your work and it gets separated from the ERIC record, the researcher will still have the necessary information on the PDF to create a citation or a search for similar articles or papers from that journal or conference. Some submitters do create a cover page, a separate page, as part of the PDF and put all the required information on it right up front. Title, author names, publication date, citation information, and the name of the federal funding entity with the grant number. And that's perfectly good way to handle this. All right. So following the citation information, now we want to actually upload the submission. All submissions must be in PDF format. We can't take PowerPoints or Word documents. In fact, the system won't let you upload anything except a PDF. So be sure your PDF is machine readable and 508 compliant. ERIC cannot accept image files that come from scanning pages. And if you remember, if you need some additional information back on the resource page, there was a link to 508 information if you need that. So let's go ahead and you can browse for your file just like, let's see, there we go. I'm going to put the ERIC selection policy in. Choose file, no file chosen. There we go. There. So you'll see your file name appears. All right. Grant funding information. This is the section that's really critical for IES grantees, and it's important for anyone else whose work is funded by a federal agency. You must enter the grant or contract number in this box, not the name of the program, but the actual contract number. I am going to put in R12345 just as a test thing. You can, even though it's one box, you can enter multiple numbers if you've had multiple sources of funding. Just separate them by a semicolon in the same box. All right. If your funding came from one of the IES centers, you'll be able to select which one, or if it was from the Department of Education, another program, or some other federal entity. But we've got the full range of choices here. You can see they're spelled out. We have NCEE, NCER, NCSER, NCES. The full alphabet is there, and you make the correct selection. All right. The next question asks if your work has been peer reviewed. And if you'll remember, I said you don't have to offer proof of the peer review as a grantee. So if your work was peer reviewed, simply click yes. If for some reason it wasn't, you can click no. As Erin mentioned, a new field has been added, linked to data management plan. It's right under the peer review box. And if you have a URL that will link to the data set from your research, please add this information here and just be sure it's a complete URL in this box. So at the end of this page, we're going to ask for your contact information, last name, first name, and an email address so that we can send you a confirmation that the submission was uploaded, or if we need to later, to request missing information. So we hit the continue button, hoping this time everything was filled out, except it wasn't. So I'm going to go back. It's hard to talk and type at the same time. There we go. That should do it. Let's hit continue. And good. That worked. All right. Now we're on step 5. Once you get to this point, you're nearly finished. As you can see, the system generates a summary screen of all the information that you've entered. You've got the option to edit any fields that may contain typos or other errors. So please make sure that your name is spelled right, your title matches what's on the document, and make any corrections that you need to. You can use the edit button to go back and do that. And to be as completely duplicative, redundant, and repetitive as I can possibly be, I can't stress enough that the publication date, the journal citation information, the conference and funding information needs to appear not only in the form, which will be the record that's created, but also on the PDF document itself. And things like the title and author names also need to match. So after you've reviewed the data, you're ready to click the green Submit button, which is down at the bottom. Once it's clicked, the record and the attached document are uploaded to ERIC and will be retrieved for review and processing. Clicking the Submit button also generates a confirmation screen. There we go. Indicating that the submission was successfully uploaded. And you will also receive an email to the email address in the contact area, indicating that your submission was received. So both the confirmation screen and the email will contain the same information that was entered into the record by the submitter. Now, if you need to contact us to ask a question about your submission, you can use the ERIC Contact Us page on the ERIC website. And it's helpful to us if you'll include the title of your work and the lead author's name. So what I'd like to do now is show you what these records look like, what the information that you put into the form, how it will translate and appear on the ERIC record. Here you can see an example of the paired records, one for the journal published article and one for the grantee submission of that article. Let's look at the grantee article for a moment. Go ahead and open that record up. You'll notice that the peer-reviewed status is indicated. And even though this is a record of a journal article, the ERIC number is an ED, which stands for ERIC document. And it has the record type of non-journal. So even though this is actually the journal article for the grantee submissions, we treat them as non-journal because the records that receive the EJ or ERIC journal number are those that come from the journals that we have under agreement between ERIC and the publishers. So let's see what else we've got on this record. We can go down here and you'll see we indicate IES funding was yes, and the grant or contract numbers are right here. And if we go back and look at the journal record, you'll see that the same grant and contract numbers that will go to the IES grant pages also appear in that record. So we have the two records because clearly this was published prior to January 2020 from the list of publishers who are participating in submitting the material on your behalf. The other thing you can notice from both of these is that the download for the full text is available because the 12-month embargo has passed, and after 12 months, ERIC can release the full text. Right. Let's talk about now what happens next. After you have submitted your information and your document, once you've done all the work of entering the document information, the matched record and document are saved and then retrieved by the ERIC team for review and processing. Submissions that are complete are processed and appear in the collection as an ERIC record within a month or two. Again, full text will only display 12 months from the publication date. However, if there has been an error or an omission in either the form or on the PDF, the submitter will receive an email indicating what's needed, and the document can be resubmitted with the corrections or the additions. As I've said before, you need to remember that if you have to make a correction, you still then have to resubmit the document and go through the entire form again. So you want to make sure that you get this right the first time. And as I said, you can certainly inquire about any submissions by using the Contact Us page of the ERIC website, which does include online submission as a choice in the email subject line. But please do include at least one of the author names and the title of the submission. It just speeds up us being able to check on things. So let's do a recap. Even though we've talked about these points, I'd like to summarize the most common reasons a submission may be returned for a correction or additional information, which, as I've said, then you have to go through the whole process again. So first of all, do check to make sure that your article isn't already in ERIC or that it falls under the policy revision for participating journals. Make sure that the funding, conference, and journal information entered on the submission form are also included on the actual document. Please always have a publication date. So many good submissions have come to us without a date and have to be returned. Be sure you've assembled a complete PDF. When we are reviewing, we do check to see if anything is missing, for example, tables, figures, appendices, and the like. And if you're converting a Word document to PDF, please check your settings. Have the document in final form with no markup showing track changes. If we see track change markings or comments, we have to consider the document is not in final form and is incomplete. So do your submission justice and provide a good solid abstract. And then please do verify that your grant number is correct and that all the applicable ones are entered in the form, separated by semicolon. So remember, you're a grantee only if the funding was from a federal source. Always include that federal contract or grant number in your form, but never, please, never a Social Security number. So thanks for following along. We look forward to accepting and processing your work. Now I'll turn the presentation back to Erin for a wrap up and any questions you may have.
Thanks, Judy. So we hope this presentation was helpful and makes your next submission to ERIC easy and transparent. The next time you submit to ERIC, you might want to download our infographic called Tips for a Successful Online or Grantee Submission to ERIC. It gives an overview of helpful resources in the submission process and includes a handy checklist that you can refer to while you're submitting your work. You can find the infographic in the multimedia section of the ERIC website. So now we're happy to take your questions. Okay, so the first question is IES aware of any journals that do not allow compliance? It would be helpful to have a list of journals that we should not pursue. So in the chat box, I have 2 links. The first is to a link of all journals approved to be in ERIC. Every journal on this list has signed an agreement that says that they are aware of the IES public access policy. It's different than, so that means that they are aware of it, they know what it is, they've acknowledged that this policy is in existence, and that grantees must notify them that if they want to publish and are subject to this policy, they at least acknowledge and that they're willing to be compliant. And I have received an error saying that it's not found. Oh my goodness. Good. Okay, sorry. I will send this link out again. Okay, so the second link is the link of journals that have agreed to allow IES, have agreed to submit the full text on behalf of the grantee. So the first list is everyone who has acknowledged the policy, even though they may not deposit for you. But the second list is those who will deposit on your behalf. So the second question is, do we know whether ERIC and other journals will honor this policy for projects funded by other funders? So ERIC is only the system used for the Department of Education. Other agencies have used other systems, and they have other policies with journals in place. Our policy only covers what we have jurisdiction over. So we would love it if you do education research, whether it's funded by NSF or ACF, but their public access policy and those agreements, we just don't have them in ERIC right now. So I realize that that's not particularly helpful. It just is a bureaucratic issue that we're trying to get through. Okay, the next question is a related set of questions, and it is, first of all, are these slides available anywhere? And the answer is the slides aren't available, but in about 3 weeks, we're going to make the YouTube video. Sorry, my 2-year-old is screaming. The archived version of this webinar publicly available on our multimedia site. We will also send you the link. In this multimedia section, specifically the grantee and online submission, that's when you can see the infographic that has the tips. And these are the same tips that Judy mentioned earlier. So they are all available on the multimedia page, and I included the link here, but you can also find it in our online and grantee submission. Okay, so next we have a bunch of questions about 508 compliance. And the questions say, I thought all ERIC submissions had to be 508 compliant, and that this is really burdensome. And so it is true. Anything that is on a federal website must be 508 compliant. We have some links available from the experts on how to make your work 508 compliant, but that is not our expertise. And so I encourage you to find those links, and that is something that can hopefully provide you some technical assistance there. Okay. We have a bunch more questions that have come through. Okay. So the next question is, if I have published my article in a journal in my country, can I submit it to ERIC with a citation? We accept publications that are outside of the United States, but you have to do more than just a submission. You also have to, more than just a citation, you also have to do the full text for ERIC, and you go through the same process. All right. And then how do we get a report peer-reviewed? And related to this, we had questions about what qualifies as peer review. So whether IES funded reports that are reviewed by the TWIG are peer reviewed, or if work that is done, whether a TA provider for a grant does peer review. And what I encourage you to do is I can't give general answers in a webinar. It's specific, but I'm including the link to ERIC selection policy. And on that selection policy, if you go to page 3, we give our definition of peer review. And that peer review policy will dictate whether or not your work is peer reviewed or not. And you should reach out in your individual circumstance, and feel free to reach out to the ERIC Help Desk if you have specific questions about the peer-reviewed policy. Okay, I think we are almost done. So then in the online submission, is there a field for DOI? There is not a field in the online submission, DOI being direct object identifier. We would get it from your online submission. And from the PDF, it's how we would capture it. Okay, so I think that is all of our questions. I'm going to just give it a minute. Okay. Well, thank you all for participating today. We thought that this was really helpful. And if you have any other questions about ERIC, please feel free to send us an email at ericrequests@ed.gov. And thank you, everyone.